So. Hello, everybody. Welcome to. This is our first in person this year. The last few months have been strange because we've been closed, as you all probably know. Welcome to the York Civil War Roundtable. My name is Adam Benz, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Library and Archives at the History Center. We're happy once again to be working with the York Civil War Roundtable to bring a great local speaker and historian to talk about some local events right at the beginning of the Civil War. And here we are. So we've had a few events online this year to avoid the weather, which we got to some degree, but not as much as we expected. I'm not complaining about that. Although the rain's been interesting the last few weeks. That being said, if you can bear with me for a few minutes, I just have a few announcements of some upcoming events at the History Center, some updates. And then a friend of mine from the History Center, John Gottschall, will be talking about an upcoming History Center event in July. And then I'll turn things over to Scott Rosenthal. As you all know, like I just said, the museum and library in this building are currently closed, although we did recently on April 6th open our seasonal sites at the Colonial Complex and the Agricultural and Industrial Museum and the Fire Museum. So check our website for details about those dates and times of when those sites are open for tours. That being said, those of you who are familiar with our library will be interested to know that we are moving next week. That relieves my heart very greatly. We've only been planning to move for the last 3 months. So here we are. It's a big deal and it's going to be interesting around here, but our collections are going to have much better climate controlled storage, maybe for the first time. So it's going to be a great experience. So that being said, the steam plant will be open to the public in July of 2024. So we will have various events that will be announced on our website. There will be an early opening for some member days if you're a member of the History Center. So please check out our website if you're interested in coming in a little bit earlier than July. Please consider a membership. We like members. They're good for us. They help pay the bills. So we will also have programs such as the Roundtable and other events in the meeting hall for approximately the next few months. At this point, definitely the Civil War Roundtable will be back here in May. We're trying to work out exactly what we're going to do, but probably also in June. Then Scott will probably talk about this as well, but there will be a hiatus over the summer, and et cetera, et cetera. So just stay tuned for those kinds of things. So just some upcoming events. On April 24th, that's a week from tonight, at 7:00 p.m. in this room, the All Vets organization will be here, one of our other partners, and they will be featuring Marine veteran Jason Knowles, who served in our long conflict in Afghanistan. So that's next Wednesday at 7 p.m. On April 27th, that's Saturday, April 27th from 10 till 3 p.m. We will have various events at the Colonial Complex, primarily for families, as part of York's Go Green celebration. So there are a lot of details about that on our website. On the following Friday, May 3rd, is our big annual nonprofit Give Local York event. And from 4 to 7:30 p.m., we will be having walking tours and building tours at the Colonial Complex. Again, details on the website. On Sunday, May 5th at 2 p.m., this event is not taking place in York. It's taking place at the Conewago Chapel, also known as the Basilica of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And that's in Adams County, in kind of that border area, just over the line, just into Adams County. This is a Jesuit-led congregation that is one of the oldest Catholic parishes in Pennsylvania and really in the British colonies, started in the 1700s, which is pretty significant from religious history. The South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society is sponsoring a tour of the Basilica on Sunday, May 5th. So if you're interested in that, registration is not required. Just make sure you meet up with them at 2 p.m. at Conewater Chapel. And then finally, a History Center event, which we're part of as part of the library. It's a library/visitor engagement event called World War II Briefings. We introduced this event last August with our first series of panelists. This coming event will feature speakers on the York County home front during World War II. They include Tina Charles, representing Friends of Lebanon Cemetery, who will be discussing African Americans in the war effort locally. Stephen Smith, who many of you probably recognize his name, who's done great work on industrial history for many years. We will be discussing York's GE plant and the development of the Bazooka rocket launcher. And Donnie Miller of Hometown History, you might have heard of that, who will be discussing local women on the home front. This is a ticketed event. It's $10 for members and $15 for non-members. Again, that's on May 11th, 10 o'clock a.m., Saturday, May 11th in this room. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to John.
Good evening. I work here as a docent for the York History Center, and in giving my tours, mostly at the Colonial Center, which feel free to come down and visit me sometime. I would say that in talking to Yorkers here, I found out that less than 50% know that York was occupied by the Confederate Army. Or so. What we're doing here with the York History Center is we're going to actually have a York in the Civil War Day. It's slated for July 20th. That's a Saturday. It'll be from 10 to 2. It'll be free. It's going to be over in Penn Park. Things that we have on the agenda so far are Jim McClure and Scott Mingus Sr. will speak jointly. Donnie Miller, which Adam mentioned, she will recreate her role as Catherine from Daughters of Charity, as a nun that gave care to the wounded Civil War soldiers. Hopefully, some of the members of the 87th Pennsylvania will be there. Scott Rosenau will be there representing the York Civil War Roundtable. We have William Goodrich, reenactor, and he will be portraying his role as an underground conductor, being interviewed by Jamie Nurple. And also, we're going to have a recreation of the surrender of York with our Mayor Helfrich playing the role of Baby Farquhar. And we have a Jubal Early reenactor that will also have that as the, yes.
What was the date again?
It'll be July 20th, from 10 to 2, it's a Saturday, okay? And it's, again, that's Penn Park. Okay, so thank you very much. Enjoy this.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, John, for all that information. Definitely sounds like a very interesting event on July 20th. I hope to see a lot of people there as well. As Adam kind of covered, the next few months are going to be here at the History Center, this location, the History Center, and in July and August, we're going to be taking a sabbatical like we did last year. So people can take their summer vacations and things like that we typically do, and it's usually a lower attendance period. So we're going to be taking a sabbatical again this year from July and August. And then in September, when we then meet again, we should be at the new facility on Philadelphia Street and opening up our new programs then. Next month, looking forward to next month, we're going to be welcoming author David Kent. His recent book called Lincoln, the Fire of Genius is about, the subtitle is How Abraham Lincoln's Commitment to Science and Technology Helped Modernize America. And he is going to be speaking about this book and talking about how Abraham Lincoln had a lifelong fascination with science and technology and would help him institutionalize science, win the Civil War, and propel the nation into the modern age. He'll discuss how science and technology gradually infiltrated Lincoln's life, influenced his growing desire to improve the condition of all men, and he will show where Lincoln gained his scientific knowledge and how that background led him to encourage its further development and use during the war. Mr. Kent is an Abraham Lincoln historian a former scientist. He's current president of the Lincoln Group of the District of Columbia. He's on the executive committee and board of directors of the Abraham Lincoln Institute, board of advisors of the Lincoln Forum, and he's a frequent speaker on Abraham Lincoln topics and served as master of ceremonies for the Lincoln Memorial Centennial Program a couple of years ago in 2022. He's won numerous awards for his scientific work, and as an Abraham Lincoln historian, he's written several books, including the most recent one, The Lincoln Fire Genius, which I highly recommend. And his previous Lincoln book for younger people called Lincoln, the Man Who Saved America. He's also written books on Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison. And he's currently working on a book about Lincoln's 2 visits to New England. Tonight, as Adam mentioned, and last week marked the anniversary of the firing on Fort Sumter. So in conjunction with some other roundtables in Pennsylvania, we're going to be looking at how look at the local reaction. How do the people in York County react to Fort Sumter? And to do that, we're welcoming back Jim McClure, local historian. He's retired editor of the York Daily Record and Sunday News, and he served as editor of Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland, overseeing different newsrooms, and he's written numerous books about York County history. So let us learn more about York County's reaction to Fort Sumter by welcoming Jim McClure.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate that introduction. A couple of quick things I'll have before I launch into this. One is that Scott Mingus and I will at York County Writers Roundtable on June 6th, I think it's here. We'll be talking about writing, editing, marketing, local history books. So that'll be Scott and I will be joining together to do that presentation. And I just want to recognize 2 folks here that have been loyal to the history community for so many years and continue to be. And that would be Ray Conard and Linda Bugash. Sorry if I said that wrong. Bugash. That's right. And no, Ray just told me the other day that he had a cancer diagnosis and he's had his first treatment and it went really well. So we're hoping and praying for you, Ray, and also in Linda's case, she's had a cancer diagnosis in actual cancer for several years, and it's in remission. So that's a wonderful thing. So I just wanted to wish you all the best, and our thoughts and prayers for you too. That's great. So whenever I present, I really do like. If something's not clear, or you want to disagree with something, or you want to agree with something, just raise your hand or yell or whatever. I like it to be more interactive than me standing up here, as I always say, droning all the whole time. So I appreciate the participation as we go. So yeah, that's the topic that that Scott laid out, and so we're going to plunge right in here and. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to mention. I'm going to get this out. This is a 3.5 pound rock. That's going to be part of our discussion here in just a few minutes, but I want to get it up here so I don't drop it later. So whenever news reached here via telegraph, it produced this newspaper headline. One of the newspapers in town used this headline, and it pretty well sums up the whole discussion. So, if you want to just 2 minutes of the discussion, want to leave, you can leave, because this is the story right here. But don't do that. There's a fearful excitement in our midst. Large and enthusiastic town meeting, patriotic speeches and resolutions. Aid for the families of our citizen soldiers. The soldiers went down to, some of them did, down to Maryland, and the families provided for the families of those soldiers. Telegraphic and railroad communications with Baltimore suspended because some irregulars, took out bridges and communications. Ordering off and departure of the York military. Passage of troops we'll talk about all these things and I'll unpack all these things as we go. Patriotism and enthusiasm of our citizens. So it was a big deal. And, you know, whenever news got back here. So these are some things that we'll talk about, some kind of takeaways here tonight. It was an unsettling time, but one of urgent patriotism, despite political opposition to Lincoln and his policies. So people kind of came together, maybe only for a couple of days, but they came together. We're Americans after all, right? And a time of, well, York Countyans after all, right? That's one of the point. A time of contradiction and confusion. We'll look at that. A time of immediate military volunteerism that gave way to the realities of war and the draft later on. So it's often in wartime, we're all enthusiastic at the beginning and then it kind of wanes. It happened in the Civil War, it happens probably every war that I'm aware of and, you know, that America's had. Once in uniform, York County soldiers support Lincoln in the war, even as support for Lincoln wanes back home here in New York. As a general rule, the attitude in York County was to hate the war. That's the majority, not everybody. The majority hate the war, love the warrior. And then York County in 1861, 1865 showed that the community can live together despite differences. So those are takeaways. We'll unpack those as we go as well. So this is just a promo slide here, and I use this on all the presentations I do. On the left is all the major anniversaries coming up. You know, the 275th of York County is first, and then you can see all these other mega anniversaries. And then off to the right, you can see the New History Center Museum is tops the list. That's open this year, and all these other major renovations or museums or builds. So this really is quite a time to be doing York County history, to be involved in York County, to be interested in York County history. A lot of good stuff coming together. Okay, so now we're back to the rock here, and this rock that you see up on the screen. I just got this a couple of weeks ago from Carol Shintz. Everybody knows Bill Shintz. Many people know Bill Shintz. Well, he was photographing a dig on the square in New York in 1975, and they uncovered the foundation of the original colonial courthouse, county courthouse. And he was able to come away with a rock, part of that limestone foundation. They were doing that to get the measurements of the courthouse, which is 45 by 45. But why was the courthouse important? Why was the county courthouse important?
For all the business of the county took place.
Absolutely, after all the business took place, what else took place there? That
Also the Confederation.
that maybe we remember where the Art of Confederation were adopted there, America's first constitution. So, you know, I mentioned that, and I'm bringing this rock around. I'll put it out later if anybody wants to see it. You know, Bill kept it. He kept it in his house on display. And Bill passed away a couple of years ago, and Carol gave it to me, and I'm taking it on the road with me. And but it's particularly germane here because what did the Articles of Confederation do?
That was the United States.
Yeah, it kind of brought the states together into one League of Nations, a League of States, a constitution. What happened whenever the firing on Sumter occurred? There's a deconfederation, right?
Right.
The states came together, the North and South came apart. There's a deconfederation. So what was built in 1777, 78, when Congress was here, came apart when the news of Sumter reached here. Confederation, deconfederation. And believe me, the folks in York County knew that. They knew it, and I show this, they knew it when the Confederates came in 1863, because that flagpole was about where this foundation, you know, right kind of in the middle of where the stone was. The Confederates trampled this stone that showed that we're seeing right here. It was a foundation. In some ways, they trampled the Constitution, our first Constitution, when they were here. So, you know, I think it's important that the Civil War in York County had that type of overtones. People here realize it's only 86 years before, and people were still alive that had gone through the colonial period. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind. Also, in terms of in bridging the two wars, there's a monument that does bridge those two wars, and that's in Salem Square. This is a monument. Does anybody recognize this monument? What's unusual about this monument? I don't think there's
It
another one in your
commemorates,
town.
the 27th. And originally the Revolutionary War period,
Yes,
the soldiers that left from York, and went to wherever they went to
yes,
get together with the Revolutionary War,
That's right.
the Army.
the York Rifles unit
York
that went up to Boston. Yes, the York Rifles went up to Boston and fought early in the American Revolution,
Mhm.
1775. That's on one side of the marker, and the other side of the marker is the York Rifles in the Civil War. Now, I don't know, I've never followed, there's some people would say there's no connection between the two, but they're both had the name York Rifles. They're rifle companies, basically. And so this one monument in good York County fashion, why have two separate monuments? One just said one monument and just put a dual purpose monument. So there we go. So but again, there's a military unit that at least symbolically brings the two wars together. What that shows is the American Revolution was still on the minds of York Countyans when the Civil War came. Yes. Yeah, it's hard to explain. It's off of Penn Street in western part of York County. There's a Salem Avenue, and so you go up, I think it's Salem Avenue off of or Princess Street off of Penn Street.
Yeah.
And you go back in those neighborhoods, you'll see it's a very small park. Yeah, did I get that about right?
Yeah, go back. Some Princess.
Yeah, go west on Princess and you'll go right through it. Yeah, Salem Avenue cuts off and then it goes to New Salem. That's why it's called Salem Avenue. Okay, so this is a quick review. I wondered about putting this in, but I want, because we want to get all the way to our topic as quickly as possible. But here's 10 impactful, disruptive, memorable moments from the Civil War. And two of these, the first two, really do deal with the period we're talking about. One is Camp Scott was organized. There were Green troops, Union troops right after Sumter. We got back from Sumter. York Rifles, we talked about that, rifle unit that organized real early and did some early work down guarding the bridges down in northern Maryland. We hosted a military hospital here. The reason I go over these is a lot of people don't realize all this Civil War history we have here. In military hospital, 14,000 soldiers treated there, Union soldiers treated there on Penn Park. Battle of Wrightsville, which really did stop the Confederate advancement across the river, in the possibility of going up to Harrisburg by the backside. The Battle of Hanover, 300 casualties there, often overlooked, the worst mass violence events were been in York County history. I don't know if that's new to anybody, 300 dead, wounded, missing. Battle of Hanover. That stopped or slowed down Jeb Stuart from getting to Robert E. Lee, and so Robert E. Lee went in the Battle of Gettysburg without quite the intelligence that he would have liked to have. There was a big spotlight on the Civil War really did bring in, we'll talk about this, on women in Black residents, and women organized. They did a lot, as usually is the case, they did a lot of the work with the military hospital camp that was here. And then something that's often, I think looks like it's like 30 U.S. colored troops from York County are buried in Lebanon Cemetery, just in Lebanon Cemetery, 30, are buried there. So, this was the emergence of Black soldiers in the American war. Okay, and then just to continue on the cost of the war, more than 11,000 Confederate soldiers overran York County in 1863. Including stealing 1,000 tractors, 1,000 horses. I figured that's something like a 2-mile long parade of horses. That I think that'd take us pretty close to Red Lobster from here. It's a lot of horses, a lot of tractors, which they really were come harvest season in those days. It disrupted families. This is often overlooked, maybe not discussed enough. Children's Home of York was formed after the Civil War. And, for orphaned, children, but also, families were disrupted. They weren't just, it wasn't necessarily dead parents. It was, sometimes some of the soldiers just didn't come home. They liked where they were, or family members just didn't come home. They liked where they were. So if a farmer, for example, had 3 sons, he might have lost one, in battle. He might have lost another who didn't come home. It just didn't come home, just chose not to come home. And now he's down to 1, so it disrupted his plan. We know that Abe stopped here, we'll be talking about that. They stopped here, went through Hammer Junction to go and deliver his Gettysburg Press, and he came back through. We'll talk about that more. And then this last part about the Confederate invasion, 6,600 rebel troops, invaded York County under Jubal Early. Surrendered, we went out and surrendered this farmhouse in Jackson Township, catalyzed in an unauthorized way by A.B. Parker, who kind of went out and dealt the hand. They kind of forced us in a way into that surrender. And Mark Snell, who I've been quoting him a lot here tonight, Mark Snell, Shepherd College, wrote a master's degree, a master's thesis on the draft in York County. And this is Mark writing in 1987, which is really early. We didn't do a lot of Civil War studies up until really the Mingus machine started. And so we did, but here we go. And he wrote an invasion of an armed enemy, the disgrace of surrendering the county seat and capitulating to their demand without a shot being fired in its defense would burn in the memories of residents for generations. So it was a big deal. Then we tend to forget about it, but we're catching up in our Civil War studies, things like what John's doing in July, things that the Civil War Roundtable is doing now, since 2007, right? They, really help us understand the Civil War better. So there's 10, a quick 10, there's more, but is any of that new to anybody? Or anybody want to, if it's not new, that's wonderful, because it means that some of the things that we've been talking about for the last 20 years is really sinking in.
Wasn't Camp Scott right over here on King and Queen?
Yes, King and Queen. I always like to use Hannah-Penn Middle School, or I guess the middle school. Yeah, Hannah-Penn School in that general area. Yeah, there still is a fair, it's a fairground, so there's still a fair avenue that branches off of streets mixed up, College. Yeah, College. So, that's where it was. Just think Hannah-Penn. Yeah.
I think my great grandfather, Benjamin Tyson, is the one that went to Camp Scott first before he ended up in Harrisburg. Both of my
Yeah.
great grandfathers ended up in Harrisburg. But I think it's on his papers that it says that he was at Camp Scott first.
Yeah, thanks
And then
for
on-
mentioning it. Yeah, Berkeley up in Harrisburg
Yeah.
replaced Camp Scott. But Camp Scott still, I'll show some numbers here in a few minutes, because this is right after Sumter. And it was, the numbers were staggering, not thousands of people. I've never seen an official count, but I'll give you some information on that. Any other discussion on that list? Yes.
I'm a graduate of Downstown from last year.
Yep.
We actually met with Mr. and Mr. Malcolms.
Yes.
I had taken a local history course, and when we were discussing the Civil War, one of the interesting things that I remembered was that was it Jeff Stewart?
Yes.
General Document? He had demanded, I believe it was $20,000 from York County banks, and he had given it to them.
Yeah, Jubal Early accepted, basically, he was the division commander, accepted the surrender. Gordon did, but he was the big commander and came in a requisition. $100,000. We only came up with 28,610. So we were a little shy of this $100,000 demand. He came in years later and said, you owe me some money, and the town said, well, I'll pay it. So, yeah, thanks for slowing me down a little bit on that. Any other questions? That's a lot, isn't it? Lots of stuff.
What unit did you say was on that monument?
It's the York Rifles, which we'll talk about that just in a second, but it was George Hayes' unit.
Yeah.
That later was folded in the 87th. Okay, so this really shows, now we have to talk politics, because politics is a big part of the story after something. And so really the mantra in York County was the union as it is, the Constitution as it is, and the Negroes where they are. That was kind of it's called the Peace Democrat position. As I mentioned before, we had abolitionists, we had some abolitionists in York County. We had some Southern sympathizers in York County, not a lot, but we had some. But by far the biggest group we had were called Peace Democrats, who really felt that it wasn't worth splitting the union over. And what would be the downside of that, of their position? If their position had prevailed?
That's still based, well, slavery.
We still have slavery. Absolutely, John, yeah. We still have slavery. It wouldn't have solved that issue. It just would have kept us from having a war. So, that was the predominant view. We'll see this in just a few more minutes. But I love this. This came from Dennis Brand, who wrote a really good book on the 87th Pennsylvania Regiment. And I'll just go over this quickly. So this is, he was quoting someone for Seven Valleys, a young man from Seven Valleys. I call myself a Democrat, and I believe in the Democratic Party is right in the main question of national affairs. I do not sanction the agitation in the slavery question. So you see what he's carving out here? He's saying, I'm a Democrat, slavery's not a problem here, we don't have it. I don't really want to get into that. So I said that if the North would commence on warfare, then I would stand by the South. But if the South would fire upon Sumter, I would seek destruction of the Republic by making war upon it. I would be against the South and say, blow them to H. So, so there's really an innate patriotism there. And I think that's kind of in our DNA here, going all the way back to the Arts Federation. I think there's a through line there. And he enlisted, he's good for his word, he enlisted in 87 Pennsylvania. And Dennis Brandt writes, the boys from York were about to prove they were almost entirely Union men. Many of them were going to shed blood. And, Dennis brings up this interesting thing. This was as of 2005, that there was only 6 men from Adams County who went to the South, documented men. I don't know what the number is in your county. Maybe someone here knows who actually were in your county and moved south to fight for the South. We know that Jonathan Kelly Duncan was a general in the South. He was already in the South. He wasn't in York County. He was York County native, but he wasn't in York County. He was down the South, and he just enlisted in the Southern Army. But he's the best known from York County. So anyway, I think that quote there kind of captures, the political terrain here in York County. Linda?
I can't understand anybody who's ever, let's say, did roots looking through cemeteries at gravestones for their family's names in either southern York County, southern West York County, or southern Eastern York County. I don't care, anywhere down out in the Heckens, have any possibility of not understanding how many people in the York County area were Union.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if you walk the cemetery, they're just loaded
Right.
with Union men. I mean, it's everywhere you go. I don't care what cemetery you go.
Yeah, we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about that patriotism did wane as it does in every war, as I mentioned earlier. We'll kind of follow that a little bit. Do you have a question back there?
Refresh my memory, when did York and Adams County split?
In 1800. Yeah, yeah, and York County before that went all the way to Franklin County. And so, but York, I don't know if anybody knows, I didn't ask Scott about this, if he knows, but it was only a handful of documented people that soldiers that fought in the South in New York County. So, in the 1860 election, this copperhead position, this Peace Democrat position, emerged. And, York County, Lincoln only got 44% of the vote in 1960. And there's York County here, and this is the Democrat vote in 1860. You see York County voted with the South. Okay, we could go into, this isn't about that topic. We could go into the fact we have a 40-mile border with Maryland or to the South. There's a lot of reasons for that. We'll talk, but I just wanted to point that out. And in 1864, Lincoln did even more poorly, did worse in York County, got 37% of the vote. But that can happen in wars. We talked about people get tired of war. In 1862, we introduced the draft. America introduced the draft. Drafts are always unpopular. And so there's, Snell introduced the idea that people started turning against the war whenever the Emancipation Proclamation came out. And that kind of signaled the fact we were fighting for freedom of African Americans, enslaved people, and that turned people off. That was a theory. He said the papers pounded on that point so much as swayed people against Lincoln. Anyway, the war became less popular. So we started off rah, 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 and then we ended up, backing Lincoln even less. Okay, so I'm gonna really end on this slide, not now, but later. I'll have this slide up again. But there's two visits outside the Gettysburg visit, two visits that Lincoln supposedly made. Or was supposed to make. One was in 1861 on his way back to the White House, the way the White House take office. He was supposed to come through York County, and Ray, you did such a good job the other day. Tell us why he wasn't on the train in 1861, whenever everybody in York, a lot of people in York were expecting him.
Well, he was on his way to Washington for the inauguration. He traveled to quite a few states coming from Springfield. And when he got to Harrisburg, they found out there was a plot involved with assassinating when he was changing train. And therefore, they took Lincoln through Baltimore at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he was already involved. But that same day, his train came through York, going down to Northern Central Washington. And it stopped in York, and there were like 5,000 people there, and they thought they were going to see Lincoln. They thought he was on the train. He didn't know he went to Washington. And an older gentleman came out and he had a beard, looked a little like Lincoln, but they rejected him. And then when the train was almost ready to leave, Lincoln's old son came out and they also rejected him. They wanted to see Lincoln.
Yeah, so it was a terrible day. I mean, we did muster ourselves to welcome him here. And then he wasn't here, and it made it even worse. We didn't vote for him, and then he didn't show. And so it's really American Union. Everybody knew that the American Union was progressing towards disunion. And Sumter happened about some weeks later. And then in 1865, Lincoln's funeral train came here after he was assassinated. And we'll talk about that more. But at that point, people in York County really did wish he was down in the White House, because they needed someone to kind of bring together the country after the Civil War. It's right after Appomattox. And so in that, for a moment, York County's disunion was progressing towards union. So you can see kind of a progression in York County from, a intense dislike for Lincoln, all the way to wishing he really was here. It really get us out of this morass post-Civil War. And so we'll talk about that again. Talk about that a little bit later. I wanted to lay that out. Okay, so here we have, right after Sumter, we have two Democratic newspapers, which would be anti-Lincoln. And we have one newspaper, which is the York Gazette. Great unanimity, the big meeting in York, and it talked about how York came together at the courthouse and made plans and, and so on, and more plans. And so it was, you can see the headline there. And then it's the Democratic press talked about, well, this is a typical case of it ain't our fault. While we maintain the whole responsibility that dire events rests upon the Republicans of the North, that's the abolitionists, the people we've talked about, the people in the North, who are not anti-war or for the war, and the disunionists of the South, that's the slave owners, the slave owners of the enslaved people. We're not either of those. We didn't have anything to do. And Union democracy are no way responsible. We're Union democracy. We cannot find words to express our sorrow at the melancholy turn of events have taken. So I told you so. You get Lincoln in there, look what's going to happen. Told you so. So here we have 4 days after Sumter, we're starting to call names. That happens, and that happens in every war. This happened right away. Sometimes there's a delay. So anyway, that's the confusion I was talking about, like a mixed signals. And then we'll go a little bit more here. So So really, the disruption did commence, and here's the Democratic press again saying, the war has, it presents results are discord, confusion, ruin of trade, the closing of workshops, the production of one, destitution, poverty, demoralization, and so on. You know, so the bridges with Baltimore down, that's our major lifeline here in York County. It still is in some respects. All those were down, and so all that resulted. That's probably a half empty way of looking at the scene. Ron Hirschner, who wrote the book Letters from Home, really good book on the Civil War. He had a slightly different take. This is down in the rural areas of York County. He said, of course, you know, there are labor shortages and there was inconvenience and things like that. But despite the reality of war, it remained a disconnection, and the average farmer, laborer, or shopkeeper in York County did not feel personally threatened. The war was in Virginia and life in York County went on. So two different views after Sumter. You know, one of morass, and one of, hey, it ain't, life's not as bad as it might seem. Life goes on. I think this is a good illustration of life going on. This is the Walls Cross Mill down in Crossroads area. And the owner of the mill died and his two daughters took over. Now, I don't know if the two daughters took over because there weren't male heirs. I don't know if some of the heirs were away at war, but at any rate, two daughters took over and ran for the next 30 years. You know, so there's an example of this major mill owner died and his daughters take over and life goes on. So, you know, now we're going to talk about how Sumter affected different groups. So we're finally at that point. We've done politics for at least a little while, and we're done with the American Revolution at least for a little while. And now we're going to, and this comes right from Mark Snell. When the war broke out between North and South in the spring of 1861, York County was unprepared for the conflict, as was the rest of the nation. The existing militia in the county was made up of 4 companies. And this is always important. These are kind of the 4 companies we often talk about. So if you're new to this, we had 2 York companies, the Worth Infantry and the York Rifles from York. And then we had 2 Hanover companies, Hanover Infantry and the Marion Rifles. And so those are 4 of the units. 2 of those units, the 2 York units, went down, tried to guard bridges so that in northern Maryland, some more damage wouldn't take place. They went down a couple of days later. Okay, so this is really kind of what happened in the escalation of the military after Sumter. The York, I already mentioned that what the York Rifles and Worth Infantry. Then they came back and then they went to Camp Scott for further training. They never didn't have real military training up to that point. But they went down there without military training to do their best for, you know, to try to more saboteurs. Military units signed up for a 3-month duty, and they did that. They were folded into various regiments, and the 87th then formed after that. This is about in July of 1861. Then 87 departed in September and camped, and they fought through the war and they camped at the end at Appomattox. So they were a unit that lasted through the war. Didn't always fight well, but they lasted through the war. This shows George Hay and the York Rifles going to the train station here. This is when they came back from their 3-month unit. This is hard to read, you can't really read it. But basically, there was a big celebration when these 3-month soldiers came back to town, came back kind of as heroes. Big community celebration. They had cannon there, and they were firing cannon. And then someone put the plunger, the ramrod into the cannon, and then got distracted, and the cannon blew off and put that projectile several blocks across town and killed a man. You know, so I point that out because war was coming to York County. Even though our guys were going off, war was coming to York County. And this was one of the ways that an elderly gentleman was killed, hit in the head by a ram. Okay, the women of York County. Now we're going to get into Camp Scott, and you know, this is Camp Scott here. This is York Fairgrounds. York Fairgrounds moved to its current location in 1888. This was the fairgrounds at the time. Then King and Queen Street, southeast of King and Queen Street, and this was the fairgrounds building. And Ian Mark Snell, writes, the women of York also pitched in with enthusiasm, forming what may have been York's first women's organization. These women organized other women, who in turn went about the task of collecting, making stocking shirts and so on. June Lloyd and I talked about this, and every church had a Dorcas society or had a women's society. So, but maybe they were more parochial. What I think Mark Snell is saying here is a community-wide organization, women's organization, not a church organization. Although many of the church, we only had a handful of churches in Europe before the Civil War, and so they would have had a broad community reach. So you could argue that a little bit. I think that, you know, sometimes you look at the pageantry of this and all the drilling going on, you know, women there in the dresses. But I want to say that the women, they may have been dressed like that then, but some of the wealthiest women and many of the women in town, they made the town work because we had thousands of soldiers moving through here. We'll talk about that now. So this is one count that I saw that at the end of April, we had 5,000 soldiers at Camp Scott. These show Camp Scott here. This is the military hospital outline in Penn Park that came in 1862. And the women met in the PA&S small building right here. They met in the first floor counting room. They did the bandages and so on. And this is Aunt Cassie, Cassandra Small Morris, who was of the sister of PA&S Small, one of the dominant families in town. And she was involved in organizing Ladies' Aid Society, one of those involved. We had 5,000 at Camp Scott at the end of April. We had 6 regiments at the end of June. I think a regiment with a full staff regiment would be what, 1,000 in those days. So we had 6,000 soldiers. Those would have been the same soldiers. They would have moved them through and down the Northern Central Railway into the battlefield. That's why we had a camp here to begin with. So, you know, these were different soldiers. So we had really, I mean, there's 10,000 right there you can count for pretty easily. And the population in York was only 8,600. So imagine today if we had 10,000 visitors to York, you know, how would we accommodate them? York Fair, they come and go kind of. It's not, we have a lot more motels today. That's a lot. I'm gonna pause for a second. Questions, comments? Women were huge then, as they are in any war. Okay, so the town of York. This is a war coming to York, and we think we think that the battle was in the South, and there were the early battles were in the South, Manassas and so on. But this is how the war came to York County. This was at the fairgrounds, and the soldiers awoke one morning in the bad weather that we had in a pool of water, 1/2 acre in size. The fairgrounds weren't made, they were made for cattle, not for humans. And so the people of York quartered some of the troops, and others found space in the courthouse and churches and so on. These conditions caused cold fevers and rheumatism, and 6 soldiers initially recuperated in private homes. You can see the sacrifice of York in accommodating this camp right after Sumter. Okay, soon part of the main exhibition building served as a hospital, and 20 soldiers occupied thick beds and so on. I think this is interesting here. This picture here, this could be a Glenn Alvin Goodrich picture, because it was a similar picture, because his studio, Goodrich building, was on the northwest corner of the square, and this is Christ Lutheran here. And if you look closely, it looks like it's snow. And this picture was dated in May. So this might be the same snow that we're still in here. May snow, that would be an onion snow of epic proportion. We're not just having the snow in May, but there was, it definitely snowed. Whether this is that snow, I'm not positive, but I think it is. You can see that the buildings are, there's snow on the road, on the muddy road and so on. So you can see that it's good to have a military hospital in town or military camp in town. I mean, it's probably good for the economy if someone has to provide the food and so on. So there's a blessing that way. But look what the strain would be on the town. The war had come to York. war and come to York. Okay, then a couple other things here, the difference between drilling and fighting. So before Sumter, we had, this is something I wrote, in east of Gettysburg. In the previous few days, the Worth Infantry, for example, was practicing bayonet drills. The unit had gained proficiency, according to the newspaper, in this beautiful drill. Crowds gathered to watch the native sons go through such military pageantry. And then I put down the bottom that it might have not occurred that these fighting men from the south of the nearby Mason-Dixon line would be at the receiving end of those bayonets. So the pageantry of war is bayonet drills, but who's going to be at the other end of those? Or maybe it's vice versa. The drills from the south would be impaling our guys. And then after Sumter, here's some of the things that happened. People in York were discovering what war was like. Fourth Infantry's Schrader got cut in the back of the head with a bayonet. In Stewartstown, Benjamin Eboff blasted in the back, was blasted in the back by a comrade with a shotgun. At Camp Scott, a soldier shot a comrade from Pittsburgh in the head after a disagreement. The bullet glanced off his head, no harm. I don't know what that says about Pittsburghers, but. And then another local resident shot a soldier in the shoulder after he entered his residence and offered an indignity to his daughter. So you have that many, you have thousands of guys here, and they roam the town, they can roam the town or live in private residences in town. This one German guy in the house didn't really like what the soldier said to his daughter and shot him. So you think about the pageantry, really. It's wonderful to think about the pageantry of war. War is war. Okay, so what about the conscientious objectors of York County? They would not serve because of their Christian beliefs. Sumter meant something to them. That meant they would be tested if they go into military service or not. And they had to work to be exempt. Jonathan Stayer, a historian here in New York County, has done great work on this topic. And I'll just give this summary here that York County, according to his count, York County's conscientious objectors numbered 156 in 1962, 6th highest among Pennsylvania counties. Pennsylvania led the nation in number of conscientious objectors. Heidelberg Township was the leader in New York County with 33. That you gain exemptions because of your religious faith. And so we had 33 people in the Mingus Mills area who chose not to serve or got exempted from service. Yes, sir.
Where's Heidelberg Township?
Yeah, that's the Mingus Mills area outside Spring Grove. Yeah, in those days, I think it went even further west towards Hanover. Yeah. There's some of the literature that's out on there. This is an area that really needs more study. John was doing a lot of study on it, but it's called the other side of them. You never think about that. Then some people just would not fight because of the religious beliefs.
Which I'm surprised that it's not a higher number because of the Quakers.
Yeah, I don't know if the Quakers had the same. Many of these were Anabaptists. They were Church of the Brethren. They were Mennonite. We didn't, and so York County proportionally still doesn't have as many Mennonites and Church of the Brethren, the plain people, as it does the magisterial reformers. You have German Reformed, Methodists, German Methodists, and Lutherans. So we tend to have more of those Germans than we did of the Anabaptist variety. I think that's my explanation. I'm not sure what Jonathan would say, but yeah.
My branch of the Tysons, the York County Tysons, when they came to Philadelphia in 1683, one of the first 13 Germans to come from Germany to Pennsylvania, they were Mennonite. Their background was Mennonite. Now later, if you go to the churches, they ended up at either Lutheran or Church of Christ. But in the beginning, when they first set foot here, they were Mennonite.
Yeah. There's a lot of theories as to why the Mennonite and the Amish didn't come across here, and the Amish coming across now, of course, as to why they didn't come across the river. They're in greater numbers than Lancaster. And I would imagine Lancaster, it would be number 1 or number 2 in that group there. I don't know about the Quakers, whether they had those prescriptions or prohibition against, serving in battle. They tended
Well,
to.
they
Yeah.
do, that's why I wondered.
Yeah. Well, the other part about that, Butch, is that we didn't have a ton of Quakers here either.
But I didn't know, I thought
Yeah.
that maybe there was a higher number of Quakers in North County.
Yeah, they tended to be north of the Conewago, and they, we had one, of course, the church here in York, and there's one in Pond Grove, but even today, I was reading a book just the other day about, from Ernie Shriver's done a book on the Quakers in Lancaster, and we had 5 at the most meetings in York County. They had at least 10 in Lancaster. So, so that gives you another reason why Lancaster is different from us. But the Quakers tended to vote pro-Lincoln. So if you look north of the Mason-Dixon line, they would be pro-Lincoln.
Yeah.
South of the Mason-Dixon line is a more anti-Lincoln. Other questions? Those are great questions. Any other questions or comments? Yeah,
Would you be willing to answer an online question?
absolutely, yes.
This is from Bill Landis.
Yeah.
Just back a couple of slides, you showed some sketches of Camp Scott. He wanted, I think I know the answer. I think the answer is yes, but I just wanted to confirm that that's a Louis Miller sketch.
Yeah, let me get back to that. Yes, that's Louis Miller. The one below is not. That one below is a sketch that, from the Historical Society of History Center's archives. So I'll mention also that this was 1887. This was a celebration 1887. Now we're on this slide, and the flagpole's still there. And it holds up these streamers for when New York became a city in 1887, in case you're wondering. And so if the flagpole came down shortly after the celebration, the same flagpole that stood in the center of the square when Juba Early's men came through and they lowered the flag. It lasted that long. Yes,
I have 2 questions.
sure.
I know that York County had a lot of German immigrants during the colonial period. And I know that, in fact, I remember one thing from my local history class is that the founding fathers didn't like how many people spoke German.
Yes, that's correct.
And what I want to know is, how soldiers came to York County. Was there any cultural tensions between a lot of the old German immigrants in York County, say, Irish soldiers coming from Boston, perhaps English immigrants from natives?
Are you talking about in the Civil War?
Yes, during the
Civil War. They generally the German population, I'm thinking mainly in southwestern New York County, who tended to be anti-war in Heidelberg Township and Mannheim Townships and so on. They want to be left alone. And so even when the Confederates came there, they didn't oppose them. They did other things to try to keep the Confederates still in the line, but they didn't use violence, or they used some words. But in terms of Union forces, when the Union forces would go through those German farms, they were almost as bad as the Confederates were. The Union cavalry came through after the Confederates did on their way to Gettysburg. They really worked the land as well, what was left of the crops. So that's a good question, but no, the Germans in general, they just want to be left alone. They didn't want to get involved, and that's why they didn't like the war to begin with. Do you have another question?
Yes, and the second question is that given York County's strategic location and overwhelmingly Republican Congress, did York County ever receive any substantial infrastructure projects or any kind of subsidies from the federal government to help promote all the excess soldiers coming in here?
Well, a couple of things on that. One is that we didn't receive the military hospital after the war because we didn't really want it. And why would the Republican administration, Lincoln administration, give us the hospital here? Whenever the newspapers said we really don't want that hospital here, where it represents war, it represents what we just have gone through. So in terms of the hospital and the camp did buy things from local farmers, so that's a form of a subsidy. But the federal government never did reimburse York for all the requisitions that took place, nor did the state government. So if you got a horse stolen, you weren't going to you never did get reimbursed for that. So some of these are are a newer thing that they weren't as in force at that point. Okay, what about the black residents in York County? And they surely would have been anxious about Sumter, word about Sumter. And one of the things, we have just a little evidence of this, because they would have always really thought that they might be captured if there's a Confederate raid. In fact, that's what did happen in 1862 in Merchantburg over in Franklin County. You know, Jeff Stewart came through on a raid in 1862 and he took some townspeople back with him. But this plaque from Merchantburg also talks about all these black residents there who also were taken back. So there was always that concern. Of course, when the Confederates came up here for Gettysburg and so on, the blacks would have, you know, the free blacks would have, you know, gone across the river. And here's the evidence of that. This was Cassandra Small writing in her diary, and she goes that, you know, when the Confederates came knocking here in 1863, Mary has been staying here with us. That's her sister, Latin Mary, has been staying here with us. That's in the basically Center for Community Engagement, the old Lafayette Club, is the old PA in that small building. Latin and Mary have been staying here as all their servants fled. That means their free servants would have gone across the river. They weren't going to stick around. So there's two evidences there that there's not a lot else written on that, but there would have been tremendous apprehension. You know, we had slave catchers come across the border even before the Civil War. They weren't pressed about coming across here and taking enslaved people back south. So it would have been a time of consternation in the black community. Okay, the churches. There's two different, again, confusion here. We have the Presbyterian church, and we had a pastor there who understood that a geography book salesman he squared off with on a Saturday was anti-Lincoln. And so the pastor's name was Street. And another man, a wounded Union officer, sat in jail accused of hitting a stranger. Out on bail the next day, Street preached on the loyalty of the citizens, making no reference to the altercation. So there we have a preacher landed in jail, standing up for what he thought. I also thought it was kind of interesting that he had a discussion with a geography book salesman, that there still had geography book salesmen working the population here in the Civil War. That he could have been a spy on one hand. On the other hand, life did go on. Life didn't stop here. In fact, I made that point earlier, but another thing that's always struck me is right about the time of mathematics, the circus was due here in town. The circus came here right after, even after Lincoln's assassination, the circus came here. So we were hosting circuses at this time of great uncertainty. You know, life did go on here. You read the newspaper, you'll see there was an active life in York County. It wasn't all war, but the war did predominate. I mean, you lose 600 men in a war, 600 out of a county of 68,000. You know, that's a big part of your 18 to 45 population. So we felt it. Then we have David Schoaf from the Methodist Church. It's now Asbury Methodist Church. He had a kind of a cascading set of comments. He said, but I think the South should be left alone to do what the people want to do. Then he dug himself a little bit deeper. I'm against the war of any kind. I'm at a loss to know how any man professing to be a Christian could engage in such a murderous act. So he got a little deeper. The people of York are so ignorant that they couldn't tell right from wrong if the two were labeled. And then lastly, after he elevated Jefferson Davis to Lincoln stature, members quit giving. And he wasn't long for the pulpit there at the Methodist Church. It goes to show two different reactions to the same thing. That was happening all over York County, you know, because York County always did recruit pastors from the South, right on the Mason-Dixon line. So their allegiances would naturally be questioned. And so there's two, again, confusing times, right? It'd be, and should have made this point earlier, it'd been like Pearl Harbor 9/11. Being akin to that. When we heard about Sumter, it was like us learning about 9/11 in Pearl Harbor. And we might have known that something was going to happen, but we didn't have any idea, and we weren't prepared even if it did. And so you can see some of the stuff that was happening here in town. We were trying to kind of assembling an airplane like while we were flying, as the cliche goes. Comments on that? Does that surprise anybody that the churches would be divided on this issue? Okay, so we're kind of winding down here, and I want to make sure that we talk about heroes, because we don't talk about heroes enough. I want to talk, a hero in the Civil War surely was George Hay, who kind of led, the York Rifles through down to guard bridges with really untrained soldiers, untrained people. But we had the same thing in the American Revolution, just to have that through line, when James Smith led militia troops before the American Revolution. James Smith was kind of a citizen soldier, and he was good and did organize some of the militia that later became the York Rifles that later went to Boston. So then we go to World War II, and there's this guy, William H. Beckner, is almost unknown. I wrote a book on World War II, and I played him up as big as I could. He was the civil defense director. He really, as soon as Pearl Harbor hit, he was saying, guard the water company, guard the bridges. He had all these procedures. He was a military man from World War I. He's a colonel. He knew exactly what to do. And so he really got things going. And in some ways, George Hay did too. George Hay was very popular in town. He was very popular. He later led 87th and was very popular as a commander. And so we can thank him for that. And then these are women from the three wars. And I'm thinking of Mary Fisher as a hero in the Civil War. Mary Fisher, kind of after Gettysburg happened, she worked in the hospital as a nurse, but she led a wagon train down to Gettysburg, to treat the wounded down at Gettysburg right after the Confederate soldiers cleared out. Then she wrote about it some years later in the Philadelphia newspaper. So we have a good record of what she did.
Is Mary Fisher Judge Fisher's wife?
Yes, Mary Cadwell Fisher.
Mhm.
She came here to work at York County Academy as a teacher and married the judge and so.
And waved the flag after the war.
Yeah, you want to tell that story, John?
Judge Fisher was a circuit judge here during the Civil War. And after the Civil War ended, there were mobs through town celebrating and very raucous, waving flags and.
Let me just say mobs of soldiers from the military camp.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it was all celebration. Everybody was happy and a lot of alcohol flowing or whatever. But they show up in front of Judge Fisher's house, which is 59
Yeah, I think it's
59 East Market. It's right next to York Water Company. And evidently he was standing outside. The mob is demanding of him to wave a Union flag, which he doesn't want, being a judge. I'm assuming a cantankerous old judge.
He was also a Democrat.
Okay.
Yeah.
He also was in jail because he was hosting a Union surgeon during the occupation. But then he was evidently on the front stoop of his house, refusing to cave into the mob. And somebody actually shot a bullet into his house. And then all of a sudden the crowd starts to cheer. And he thinks he's done a great thing, but he doesn't realize that Mary Fisher's above him waving a Union flag above his head. So,
Yeah, it's not a great moment in our past that you'd have, the word came back that the Confederates had surrendered. And so these soldiers, these invalids from the hospital just kind of poured out of the hospital into the streets of York. And they actually entered homes, did home break-ins really, to try to force people, compel people to wave the flag. You do a lot with this, but that was John just repeated how Judge's wife averted some problems there for the judge. Yeah, And then we have, in the American Revolution, this is not her, but this is a representation of her. We had the widow Mimmons who, would sat at her day, her spinning wheel all day, making things all day long. And a visitor commented on that, saying, you know, she didn't make any noise, she just did her work. And I've often felt like she was doing, why would she need all these things that she's making? Was she selling them to make, make ends meet? Or was she making things for the military? But either way, it was a good thing. But countless women across York did the same, York County did the same thing. Guys were away at war, they had run the businesses and the farms, and they had run the homes. And they had all these cantankerous delegates from the Continental Congress in their midst. So again, York was kind of overrun with outsiders and really did do a great job. At that moment, a different type of outsider than the Confederates when they came, but anyway, and then one of my favorites, and Linda, you may know her, she's no longer with us, Flo Snyder Neff.
She's a personal friend.
Personal friend. Well, anybody know Dan Neff?
Yeah, I know the whole family.
Yeah, yes,
I was gonna ask Linda, was she our love that from Redline,
Yes,
the school nurse?
yes.
yes.
Oh, I loved her.
Yeah, she was
Yeah.
great.
And she was.
She was a wonderful lady.
Yeah, this may be a part of Flo Snyder Neff's, or you all may know, or maybe. In World War II, she was working in the office of Johnson Controls, York Corporation. And she was 18, 19 years old. That's her picture there. And she would write poetry. And York Corporation would put her poetry in their newsletter. The newsletter they send out to employees all over the world. They had 5,000 employees. So her poetry was seen by at least 5,000, And so here we have this, this office worker obviously had a lot going on, wrote this beautiful, there's a poetry of hope, there's a poetry of prayers. And so imagine being in a foxhole in Europe and getting, oh, here's my newsletter, I'm gonna read that, and seeing poetry in this. They ran her picture, of course, with it, and so she then became a nurse and, wasn't a military nurse, but became a nurse, I think, during World War II. And then she later became a guidance counselor on Red Line and later cared for her parents. And I think that's a hero. And so there's three heroes here. Other stories to tell about Flo?
Just that I grew up on South Main Street.
Yeah.
And her house, by the time I was old enough to know who she was, they lived on Pine Street.
Yeah.
So they just lived behind us, a block on that side of Pine Street.
Yeah.
And I just ran into her through school and her kids, and I grew up at the same time, so,
Right.
And the family business was in the alley across the street from us, so I just grew up knowing them.
Yeah, a little bit of World War II history in there. We're not gonna charge anything more for that. But these are heroes, and the heroes don't have to be wearing uniform. They can be heroes in many ways. Okay, so now we're back kind of where we began, and I want to this is not quite back to where we began. I want to try to talk about this because this shows after Sumter kind of really a kind of a comparison. Right away, this is Mark Snell writing. It takes a little imagination to picture a young man return to his home after enlisting, dressed in his brand new uniform with shiny gold buttons, attracting the attention of the neighborhood girls and causing considerable envy among the young men of his age who had not yet signed up. All it took was a knock on the door, a few doors down, and convince his buddies what fun they were going to have by enlisting in the war after Sumter. I mean, it's going to be a short time anyway, maybe one battle. If it's that, come on, join up. Let's go and have a good time. So think about that as, which is likely all the pageantry and if you get the status of being a soldier. And think about, and here we have Snell writing only a year later. As the war began to drag into 1862 and the casualty list grew longer and longer, it became obvious that the young men of York County would no longer rush the recruiting stations that the organization had before. Although recruiting had slowed down, York County still managed to enlist enough men to make up and so on. So eventually there was a draft in September of 1862 in more than one draft. So we got into the draft, that made the war even more unpopular. And we're getting outside of our great range of discussion here right now. So you see the contrast? You see the rah, rah, rah at the beginning, but isn't that true? How about any war that comes to mind? Let's talk about war on terror, the invasion of Iraq. Wasn't that, I mean, we mowed right through there. Everybody felt really good about that, you know, and then the reality set in, and the occupation and the rehabbing of the country and so on, and it became unpopular. And so that just makes, I think that, you know, that there's probably lessons there. The next time we're in war, and there will be a next time, probably, the way things are looking. You know, it's easy to get on board, and yeah, and we should always be on board. And really, York was on board in many ways, but not entirely. You know, and the war does wear on you. You lose all those men, and we talk about the 600. What about the wounded? What about those that we know we just are missing? We never saw them again. Okay, the soldier vote was interesting. The soldier vote versus York County civilian vote in 1864. The soldiers could vote, and the soldier vote came. You can see down at the bottom here. Soldiers from all York County units backed Lincoln by 680 to 389 vote. Just to refresh your memory, this was a vote of York County civilians, York County men, male York Countyans in 1864. Georgia, this is Lincoln versus McClellan. So who we vote, we like McClellan, about 63% of the men voting like McClellan better than Lincoln. And but the soldiers by what, that's about 7-4 back Lincoln. Interesting, isn't it? Any thoughts on why?
Platform was a peace platform, so in essence, his party was against the war. Even.
Right, that's correct.
Plus McClellan, I think, tried to make his name in the early stages of the war to turn political. And he really wasn't very successful as a general.
Right, that's a good point, which, yeah. Why would you vote, if he wasn't a good general, how could he be a good president?
He couldn't command an army. How is he gonna run a country?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I find that interesting because McClellan was hugely popular with the soldiers. They loved the way he organized and treated them. So I find that very interesting that they didn't support him as well. But I think at that point in 1864, the typical Union soldier wanted to see the thing through.
Right.
They went that far. They just wanted to see it to completion. They were starting maybe to see a little bit of the end of the tunnel, but I think that's why they probably voted for Lincoln.
And really, that was after Sherman had gone through Atlanta. Things were looking a lot better as far as the war goes at that point. Yes, sir.
I know that as the war went on, Lincoln also became more competent with regards to military affairs. I remember reading about it from I think it's James McClure.
Yes. Yeah.
When we began, he started reading books on military tactics, started studying generals and American and previous books. I know that one of the things that a lot of people respect is that Lincoln was able to take authoritative stance with regards to the war, taking a commanding presence with his general policies. So I can imagine that a lot of soldiers also respect that.
Yeah, well, he made a good hire, right, in U.S. Grant. He made it, and so he could show you get hired. Someone could win on the battlefield. Yeah. So we're here at the end, and you know, I want to just ask some questions about this. This is 1865. This is Lincoln after he was assassinated. We have a Democratic paper, the York Gazette, the major Democratic paper in town here. And look at how they treated his death. You know, it's hard to read there, but it says a national calamity. Here you have a Democratic paper, this paper opposed him all the way along the way. So but look how they treated the office at least, if not him, with respect. And then in fact, they even put these, what are called score lines between the columns. In those days, you didn't have color ink, and how are you going to show something's really important? Well, this is a kind of a mourning signal, the black of mourning. So you can see that even for a moment here, they got on board, the community got on board. And really, it was a major moment in the community. The community really did come out, opposed them forever, voted 63-37 against them only a year before. But here we are, community coming out, flags all over the place, black bunting all over the place. They came together, the community came together. So we're back to this and just trying to show the difference here between 1861, after Sumter, American Union was progressing toward disunion, but look at the progress that we made, all the blood that had been shed, and look what we came away with. We came away with a community that was coming together. And Lincoln was hated, by the whole community when there was funeral train did get here. So I want to just ask the question here at the end. This gives you can see the Democratic papers treatment of his assassination. That came out the next morning. It was assassinated on Friday. It came out on Tuesday, but the reporting was done on Saturday here. You can see the score line and stuff. But I want to ask a question of you all here tonight. Today, if a Democratic or Republican president were to die, would you or your America's reaction be one of mourning or good riddance? I think we can learn from this. We can look at Lincoln, unpopular as anything in your county. And, I'm just, maybe you don't want to respond to this, but it's something to think about. If we were to die, what would we say about that? We don't have to name names, but if it's Republican or Democrat. I'll just work down from two other scenarios. Would it be different if he were assassinated? If the president was assassinated versus dying in office of some problem, some health problem. Does assassination in some ways elevate you? It's a martyrdom. So, and the third question, would it make a difference who assassinated him? John Wilkes Booth from the South assassinated Lincoln. So you had the North looking down at the South saying, this is one of your guys that did this. So maybe that's what brought us together a little bit. Or what if it was today it was a foreign country that did it? It does depend on what foreign country it was. Does depend if a Democrat assassinated a Republican. Does it make a difference? So what do you all think? Which
I think the divisiveness that exists today between the political parties, you would have one party shouting for joy and another one in mourning. And I don't think it would make a difference if he was assassinated. What might make a difference too. I mean, that might be calls to pull everybody together, like Pearl Harbor or 911. But I mean, today, I can remember when there was an issue before the country and Congress would sit there and work it out. They would debate it, they would work it out. It seems now that if somebody has an idea for a resolution on one side of the aisle, people on the other side aren't going to vote for it because it wasn't their idea.
But there were
Because they're
Democrat and Republican.
but
They're not working together.
Like in Congress,
They're not
we know
working-
Thaddeus Stevens, for example,
Well,
was
yeah,
very.
there was the vision, but they seemed to be able to work it out. Which is, I mean, right before Sumter, who was the congressman that was practically beat to death by another else. Sumter. But they still. The government still functions. And now it seems as if we can't accomplish anything because we can't agree on it. You know, the art of compromise seems to have been lost.
Thanks, Butch. Linda, do you have something?
I just was thinking back to when Kennedy was shot. I'm not a Democrat, I've never been a Democrat. But I'd be willing to say that a lot, if you go back and read a lot of his things at the time he was president, like his race for space, and some of the other things that he was for, he was more of a Republican than he was a Democrat. He was the most Republican Democrat president we've ever had, if that makes any sense. But a lot of the things that he was for, like I said, my family, I've always been staunch Republicans. But there were things that he wanted to do that I went along with and wanted to do them too. And he's the last Democratic president that I can even say that about.
Okay.
That there were a lot of things that he was interested in that I was interested at that time. And that's the last time I can really remember having a Democratic president that I really agreed with.
Well, York County really didn't agree with them because we voted against Kennedy and we voted in favor of Nixon by a pretty good
Well,
shot.
but we voted for Nixon too, but I'm just saying, you know, when he
Yeah.
came in,
Right.
he was the closest thing to a Republican that I'd ever had with a Democrat.
Great. Thank you. Other comments on this scenario? Yes,
I think that I think many people would be a combination of mourning and good riddance. But
well, we'll have a test for this coming up, won't we? Because Jimmy Carter's coming, you know, is in hospice or whatever. A liberal Democrat, you know, by any account, but one who did great things by many accounts as well. So how that would be probably a little bit of a test, in the same way this was a test. York County came together here, and perhaps we would come together when Jimmy Carter dies. We voted against Jimmy Carter, of course, by a good margin. So, other questions or comments on anything we discussed tonight?
The only thing I can say is when you were comparing the train trips with Lincoln when he was elected the
Yes.
first time and when he was elected the second time, but there wasn't anything mentioned in there about, although they didn't come through York, he did come on the train for the speaking in November of 1863.
Yeah, I mentioned that. That was a bullet point. I mentioned it real quickly and moved on because I figured I should have paused on that a little bit more. But yeah, he was here.
Yeah, and there was a lot of big following for that
Yeah.
visit because of why he was here,
Yeah,
or why he came through, and of course, then went Hanover Junction went that way.
yeah.
But there was still a big following when he was here in 1863, in November of 1863.
Yeah, we got to wrap up, but other questions?
Let me rehash again, now, you're kind of voting against Lincoln, who was Republican. Now, you just said that they voted against Kennedy, who was a Democrat.
Right.
and voted against Farmer, who was a Democrat. So when did they do this flip flop thing?
Well, there's different ways. It's a very good question. The flip flop, there's different flip flops, but I'm sounding like a politician here. The last flip flop occurred in about 1984. York County had a Democratic majority, voter majority up until 1984. And then it split there. It's like Reagan's popularity, some corruption in the Democratic Party. And then, so there were several elections there where Democrats lost and then they regained in 1988. But, so there was a transition period there, but the overall census changed in about 1984. So if anybody here grew up in York County, it's chances are your parents were Democrat. And then, but now they could be Republican because it just, you know, the old Democrats would have been more of a Southern Democrat because we're almost in the South. We like Jeffersonian ideas, we like Jacksonian ideas. And so that was the predominant party. So we kept those Democratic registrations up until about 1984. And then we traded them in. We had enough of the stuff that the Democrats were doing. We liked Reagan. We liked some of his ideas. And the same way that Reagan appealed to Southern Democrats, he appealed to the Democrats here in York County, and we changed our registration about that. So that's one answer.
And the parties themselves changed a bit in terms with the different issues that came up.
That's right.
The alignments changed within the parties.
Yes. Adam?
I think, I mean, it's really a long process that started in 32 with Roosevelt, because he pretty much solidly moved the Democrats to the left. But it's a culmination of everything since then for what, 90 years of the parties purging their, Republicans purged their liberal members and the Democrats purged their conservatives. And so really, it's a result of that, which has gone on since the New Deal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's, we could go through, presidential voting, maybe that's a topic someday, presidential voting patterns in your county. But basically, from 1800 to 1904, we voted entirely for Democrat presidential candidates. 1904, we flipped to Teddy Roosevelt, then we went back to Democrat until 1920. We were Republican for Harding and those guys in the 1920s. And then when Roosevelt came in, we flipped back to the Democrat. We remained Democrat, as far as anybody knows, up until 1984. So, thank you, Adam. Adam's a Cold Warrior and a person knowledgeable about the politics of the mid 20th century. Other questions or comments? Yes.
I've heard Pennsylvania be described as Philadelphia in the east,
Yeah.
Pittsburgh in the west, and Alabama in the middle.
Yeah. I disagree with that.
I don't know, I'm just.
James Carmel said that. This is going to get us on a bad trail and Adam will kick us out here. But you can look at the Civil War and see that's not true. Because if we were Alabama, we would have voted, in the war solely, we've been solely pro-slavery, but we weren't. We might have voted for Democrat, but we weren't pro-slavery here. We were somewhere in the middle. We just wanted, we wanted peace. It's a middle ground position. We weren't abolitionists, but we surely weren't pro-slavery. So there's some scholars from your college that have looked at the voting patterns in presidential elections since 1800, Melander and Hatch. And they said basically, like in 1964 is a good case of this. Whenever Barry Goldwater, a conservative Republican, your county rejected him. Too conservative, too extreme. Your county does not like extremes. And so we tend to vote for candidates who are more moderate or don't, at least aren't extreme. So what Carville's saying is we're extreme as Alabama and we're not. And that's a whole, I can go on a lot about that. I think I'm going to mischaracterize us. Because we're in the north and we're in the south, we have a little bit of both, but we're not in the south. So we're not Alabama. So I just think that's unfair.
I just read a paper on York surrendering during the Civil War. And one of the conclusions the author drew was that the reason we rolled over and played dead, so to speak, so easily was because of the heavy Germanic influence, and Germans tend to be very strict. And their thought was, okay, we'll do this, and they won't take stuff, they won't ruin our farms. And now that's just his opinion. But that basic thought pattern would also sort of coincide with democratic philosophy a lot.
That's right. John's program in July, I suspect we're going to be wading into some of that. I just think that we sold our honor, and you can see what Mark Snell said earlier, that if we just done what Hanover did and just stood there and been passive aggressive, which is what Hanover did, we would have discovered the Civil War a long time ago. We wouldn't have taken until the year 2000 or whatever to discover the Civil War.
There's no glory in surrendering.
Right. But even more to the point, we sought them out.
Yeah.
We sought out.
We went from here to the west to find.
Civilians sought out an army, dismissed the military, sought out an army in a theater of war. Right? 10 miles away, sought them out. That is kind of made us different from any other town that surrendered.
They were prominent businessmen too.
Yeah. They had property protect.
They weren't, so how should I say, elected officials representing everybody.
And George Hay.
Yeah, George Hay went as a military attaché.
Yeah. He knew Gordon, didn't he?
No, that was A.B. Parker. Yeah. I since we're running late here and these, I could talk all night about this, but and let's keep talking, but I suspect that we ought to get out of here. So thank you all very much. It's been a great discussion. Really appreciate it. Thank you.